This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's Saturday. That means it's time for Nitsa Notes, my weekly vlog series about limited magic. We're still looking at Aetherdrift, and last week I took a look at some hidden gems, some cards that were being taken late, given how they're actually performing in the format. In this video, we're going to look at the opposite end of the spectrum. We're going to be looking at cards you should largely steer clear of, or at the very least for some of them, take them a lot later than they're currently being taken. As usual, we're looking at 17 Lands data. You can head over to 17lands.com and sign up to have them track your Magic Arena data. It gives you this huge number of drafts and games to look at when you are evaluating how cards are performing in the format. Data, of course, is not the end-all be-all, but it does help tell a story and help show us what's going on in a limited format. All right, so let's look at a baseline card. I'm going with Siphon Fuel here. So I use this baseline card both to introduce you to the data we're going to be looking at in the format, and because everything that we see in this video is being taken earlier than Siphon Fuel, but has a lower win rate. So Siphon Fuel has a 54.9% win rate. That number is worse than it sounds, of course, because 17 Lands users do not have a 50% win rate like the Magic community as a whole. They have a higher than normal win rate, and for this particular format, that win rate is 55.1%. So Siphon Fuel is right around like a solid card in the format, and I think if you've played with it, you know that that is, yeah, that's how it feels. It's a removal spell you play one of when you've got to, and it's not like terrible, it can deal with most things, but you also don't feel great when you cast it. It's just too expensive to be premium or great or anything like that. And that's why it's a good sort of jumping off point, because this is a card that we all look at and say, yeah, I mean, you know, you play one of these, they're all right. It kills something, gains you a little bit of life, but it's too expensive to be great. And that is reflected by the win rate, and it's probably being taken about where a card like this should be, mid-pack. But like I said, every single card in this list has a lower win rate, and for the most part, a significantly lower win rate, and has a much higher average pick. They're being taken a lot higher. So let's go ahead and jump into the list, and I want to start with one that I've talked about before in this series. I talked about it in the What I Got Wrong video because it was so quickly evident I was wrong about this card. But I think it needs to be talked about again because it's still being taken way too highly, and I see people playing it all the time. And that is Spire Mech Cycle. So I get what, like I said, I got this card wrong, gave it a B in the set review, right? So I thought it was going to be good. I think anyone who reads this card, especially in a format with this many vehicles and mounts, probably would think it would be good because it's this big haste creature. If you exhaust, you don't even have to crew it. It's not that hard to exhaust it and put a counter on it, and it becomes like, an efficient haste creature. But this format being what it is, that is a very slow format where you need your cards to do a lot more than attack and block. You need to grind out value for the most part. That makes Spire Mech Cycle not good, and that's an understatement. It has a win rate of 49.8%, and it's being taken around pick 6.23. So it's being picked like it's one of the better uncommons in the set, which, I thought it would be going into the format. And so I don't blame people for thinking that. But at this point, this is one of those cards you really just need to steer clear from. If you're gonna play a red deck, you are not doing like red-white aggro vehicle stuff. That deck is just largely a dud. If it's super open, you get some really great rares and mythics vehicles like Boom Mobile and the 5-mana 5/5 horse, maybe it works, right? But it just doesn't work often enough. You really need to steer clear of a card like the Mech Cycle, which when you can't exhaust it is bad, and when you can exhaust it, the upside's not that great. You attack into your opponent's Engine Rat and it gets traded with for 1 mana, or the attack just doesn't matter because your opponent has a board filled with creature tokens and bodies that they've generated with one of the set's many value engines. So, it just doesn't work out as a card in this format. It's a bad card in the format, even though it's not like an inherently bad card overall. It just doesn't fit what this format's about, and you need to steer clear of it. Playing this actively hurts your limited deck. All right, let's look at a similar card to Spire Mech Cycle in Unswerving Sloth. So this is also a vehicle that I liked. I think I gave it a B or a B- in the set review too, or it's a mount rather. But it hasn't really panned out that way. It's not nearly as horrendous as Spire Mech Cycle. I don't think it's a card you should 100% steer clear of, but you definitely shouldn't be taking it around somewhere between pick 6 and 7 because it has a 53.1% win rate. And that win rate is a little better than it sounds because white, although it's not as bad as red, is one of the colors that lags behind in this format, behind the Sultai colors. And this is another one where I really don't fault anyone, especially if they're going in blind and looking at this card like I did in the set review and thinking it would be good. I mean, sure, it only attacks and blocks, and that was something I said in the set review that I was like, you know, it is just good at that sort of thing. It's expensive and doesn't immediately give you any value, but that saddle trigger is pretty legit, I thought, because it's kind of free. You know, you have to have enough power around, which isn't guaranteed, but when you do, you can just swing in with this thing every turn and all your creatures untap. So there's like, you know, nothing to be lost there. However, just like the Mech Cycle, just being a card this expensive that can only attack and block just isn't what you want to do. I mean, this is a format where Aether Siphon, even if you never get to max speed, is a good card. And that tells you, you know, that's what's wrong with Spire Mech Cycle and Unswerving Sloth. These like top curve things for more aggressive decks that look like they'd be really good, they're not, because your opponent's just going to outvalue you. Removal is really good in the format. They can kill these expensive things pretty efficiently. I mean, I was talking about how Siphon Fuel doesn't always feel great, but when you're using it on a Mech Cycle or a Sloth, it does actually feel pretty good because you're breaking even on mana and gaining some life and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, that's the problem with both of these cards. Just attacking and blocking when you're that expensive isn't really enough. All right, let's look at a couple of cards that are similar. They play a similar role in the format. I talked about them together at various times in my discussion of this format. And those are Risen Necro Regent and Endrider Spike Spitter. So these aren't two cards that you should entirely steer clear of, I don't think. I play them when I'm in the right kind of deck. The Necro Regent is taken around pick 4.3, has a win rate of 54.2%. Spike Spitter is taken around pick 4.8, and it has a 53% win rate. I think both of those win rates reflect that these are solid cards, especially as build-arounds, and these are value engines that can get you there. You know, and you do need those in your black and red decks if you're going to keep up with what everyone else is doing, you know, with cards like Aether Siphon. But the problem is, like, a lot of the other good cards that just generate tons of value over the course of the game, like Pactol Terror and stuff like that, like, they don't ask you to do hardly anything, other than do something that's very easy to do in the format, which is play artifacts, for the Pactol Terror, for example. Whereas the Necro Regent and Spike Spitter need max speed, or they are very mediocre cards, or worse than mediocre. Like, if your deck has 0% chance of getting max speed, you really shouldn't play either of them. But generally speaking, you can end up in decks that get to max speed. I've had some black-white decks, especially with the Necro Regent, where it definitely won me some games because that deck's pretty good at getting to max speed because of all the cheap cards with max speed and various ways to lower the opponent's life. And Necro Regent can take over games. Spike Spitter, you know, its win rate looks rough, but it's not as bad because red is so awful in the format. And it can work in black-red decks especially. But overall, like, these are being taken way too early because they just aren't powerful enough, consistently enough. Even in decks that are sort of ideal for them, you're going to get them sometimes and have to run them out when you don't have max speed. And when you do that, they feel really miserable. I mean, if a card like Unswerving Sloth at 5 mana isn't that good, Risen Necro Regent is real bad at 5 mana when you're not getting a zombie token every turn, right? So, yeah, I mean, I do think these two cards are solid and you'll play them, but you absolutely should never be taking them this high in a draft. Mostly, you know, with the Spike Spitter, you shouldn't really be considering jumping into red that early in a draft most cases, unless you've, you know, gotten a couple of bombs or something. And like the best black decks in the format are generally like the artifact ones, which the Necro Regent doesn't really help you with. So they aren't really playing to the strengths of this format, other than in the sense that they are value engines that can help you keep up with other decks. And I think they're both perfectly playable. Like I said, you'll play them reasonably often, but you definitely shouldn't be taking them before like pick 7 or 8 in most cases. All right, next let's look at Wickerfolk Indomitable, which has a win rate of 50.8%, and it's being taken around pick 8.4. So, yeah, Wickerfolk Indomitable, I was just talking about how artifact stuff is really good in this format, and it is. Like, blue-black decks are one of the better decks in the format. The strength of Packdoll Terror and the Signpost Uncommon that makes a couple of Thopters is a lot of what carries this color pair. And so you'd think a card like the Indomitable might be kind of okay, but it's not. It is an artifact, so it does trigger your artifact things like your Packdoll Terrors, and it's an artifact payoff, but it's just not a good card. Like, I don't remember what I gave it in the set review, but I definitely overrated it a little. I didn't think it was good, but I probably gave it like a C-, and it's just like, in any format, I don't think this would be good. Mostly because it makes you pay the mana, it makes you pay life to get it back, and it makes you sacrifice something. like that is a lot to ask. And sure, with Packdoll Terror, the life paying maybe doesn't hurt as much. And if you have a couple Packdoll Terrors in play, getting it back can feel pretty good. But there's just not enough expendable stuff in the format for Wickerfolk Indomitable to be worth bringing back. You usually have to give up something real to get it back, and that's just not very good. And then the stat line's not that good either. Like, this is just not a good card. I don't know what limited format it would be good in. It just asks too much of you. I guess a format that has like a mountain of treasure tokens and food or something, maybe it'd be a little bit better, but paying the mana, the life, and having to sacrifice something is just a huge ask for a creature that's just not that good to begin with, and that's how it's performing. It's a lot of the artifact creatures in the format are good. This one's not. All right, let's look now at Plow Through. This card actually is the only one on the list that has a higher win rate than Siphon Fuel, but it's only by a tiny amount. It's being taken around pick 4, and it has a win rate of 55.2%. So it's 0.3% higher than Siphon Fuel, but I thought this card was worth discussing because it's substantially worse than the win rate would have you believe, because green is so good. When you have a bunch of great green commons, like green has, there's an effect where it just pulls up every other card that's green because you play it with a bunch of other good green cards. Just like Endrider's Spike Spitter's win rate is punished by the fact that there's not that many good red ones. Plow Through is being taken around pick 4, so it's being treated really like it's premium removal, but it's just not. It is only 1 green mana, but the fight effect is pretty hard to fully take advantage of, especially early in the game, and that's one of the benefits of only spending 1 mana on removal is that you can cast it early, not Plow Through. It does feel a little bit better when you use it to destroy a vehicle. Paying 1 mana to destroy a lot of vehicles in the format feels pretty good, but most of the early vehicles in the format aren't really worth destroying with it either. So, it's cheap, but it can't actually be used effectively most of the time until much later in the game. And it's just really funny that it's so much worse than the common green removal spell in the format. Like, that card is substantially better, and it's also worse than most of the best commons. You've got your Ketradon and the Exhaust Mouse and the 4 mana 4/4 Reach Vigilance. Like, those are all way better than this, but they're being taken later. Because, I think people see Plow Through and they think of premium removal because it's 1 mana and it destroys stuff. But it's situational and conditional enough that it's not actually that good. This isn't one you steer clear of fully, like Wickerfolk Indomitable and Spire Mech Cycle. But it is one that you should not be taking as highly or valuing like its premium removal. You should look at this card as kind of like Siphon Fuel, and that's what the win rate's telling us. And I think their win rates are more comparable than it looks at first because of the advantage green has. So, it's on the same level as Siphon Fuel. Think of it that way, not as a card you should take really early. All right, let's look now at a rare. Let's look at Lifecraft Engine. So, this is being taken around pick 2.88, and it has a win rate of 51.8%. So this is another vehicle that shows us that a lot of the vehicles in the format just aren't good. I thought this would be okay because I thought you'd be able to name a creature type and it would buff your board enough when you played it to have an impact on the game beyond attacking and blocking, and it often does. But there's not enough of a creature type theme, which, I did say in the set review, but it's even less pronounced where you can buff more than one thing with it. And then just like jamming a bunch of vehicles into your deck because it does buff all vehicles is just not generally a winning strategy in the format. You want like a few vehicles, and they're generally like value or really efficient or even defensive vehicles like the Midnight Mangler and stuff like that. Like, that's what you want to be doing with vehicles in this format, generating value, protecting yourself to win a long game. Lifecraft Engine isn't particularly good at any of that. It's pretty difficult to crew. It doesn't improve your board enough. and it's being picked like it's, maybe not a bomb, but a very good rare, and it's just not. This is one you should largely steer clear of, unless you somehow end up in a deck that has like 10 things with the same creature type where it probably gets a bump. But even then, it's just worse than it looks. It just hasn't performed well. I've never played against it or with it and really felt like it was doing anything meaningful. Let's look now at Trade the Helm. So this isn't being taken like crazy early, but it is being taken earlier than Siphon Fuel. It's being taken around pick 8 and has a win rate of 51.5%. I don't know what people are doing here. Like, Trade the Helm should be getting taken as like the last pick in a pack. Like, 8 isn't an insane number, but it is when you look at what Trade the Helm actually is. It has the bad win rate to reflect that it's not great. And I think people look at it and they say, well, it can cycle, right? I can cycle this, and that's the fail case. And the times where my opponent has something that I want to steal and I have something expendable to give them, it's going to feel amazing. I think that's, the thought process people have. They think of the floor not being that low. But we've seen a lot lately that having cycling for 2 or 3 mana on a card that is just bad doesn't really help. I mean, this card would be worse if it didn't have cycling, no doubt about it, because it does trigger some payoffs in the format, stuff like that, and just the value of being able to throw it away does something, but it doesn't do enough. You don't need to be running this in your blue-red cycling decks. You should have better things to trigger the discard things on your payoffs, and it's just very difficult to ever set this up to do something meaningful. I mean, even when you give your opponent, like, I don't know, a Thopter token and take their 4/4 artifact creature, let's say, it's not that good. It's like playing a removal spell and these are always bad. It's like playing a removal spell that destroys your opponent's thing and gives them a token. It's a little better than that when it lines up because of the fact that you get something out of it. But the difference is those other spells can always destroy a thing and give you a token, and they're still bad. And this takes way more setup where you just need things to line up correctly, and cycling does not bail it out. It's a bad card. On a similar note, Rover Blades is being taken ahead of Siphon Fuel. It has a average pick of 8.18 and has a win rate of 49.5%. So, this, Rover Blades, Trade the Helm, both of these are cards you should steer clear of entirely, I think. This is a card that, again, it's not being taken super early, but at this point it should be, one of the last cards in a pack. Vehicles aren't that good in the format. That's been established, especially when all they can do is attack or block. And sure, this one can equip, it's a cool design, I'll give them that. But it's not actually good because it's not that good as a conditional double strike creature, and it's way too expensive to give double strike to your stuff. I'm not sure why people are taking it as early as they are. As the win rate will reflect, it just doesn't do enough. It sometimes is an entirely meaningless play, and when it's not meaningless, it's inefficient. All right, let's close things out with another rare with Crypt Caller Chariot. So this is being taken even higher than the aforementioned Lifecraft engine at 2.62, but it does have a slightly higher win rate than the engine of 52%. So this card, I think, is actually powerful. It just is in a weird spot in the format. There really isn't a black deck in this format that's about discarding. It just doesn't exist. And I said that in the set review, but I still thought you'd be able to build around it some by putting enough cycling in your deck. But there aren't enough good black cards with cycling efficiently enough for it to line up often enough for you to actually get like a zombie out of this. Like, if this card was blue or red instead, and, obviously it would make like a different colored token and probably wouldn't be a zombie, it'd have to change the flavor a little bit. But the point is that if this were in blue or red, colors where you're discarding a lot, it would be way better. So this is just one of these cards that just misses on the synergy point for what black is doing. Like, black does want cards in the graveyard, but it gets them there by surveilling and by milling itself. Not usually by cycling. There are a few cyclers that work, but most of the time, if you're in black, you're going to have like 2 cards that trigger the chariot, and that's not good enough because that means it's just one of these vehicles where all it does is attack and block. This would have value engine potential if black could actually discard enough, but it can't. So the chariot is just in this weird spot where it's a build around that generally doesn't work out because of its color. Alright, so those are 10 cards from Aetherdrift, some of which you should steer clear of entirely, like Spire Mech Cycle, Wickerfolk Indomitable, Trade the Helm, Rover Blades, and the 2 rares, Crypt Caller Chariot and Lifecraft Engine, and some others that you should definitely not be taking as highly as apparently people are, those being Unswerving Sloth, Plow Through, Risen Necro Regent, and Endrider Spike Spitter. So I think if you adjust how you're valuing these cards, it will probably help you improve your win rate. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on past videos, including draft videos and more analysis of this format, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.
Mm-hmm.